And so the first question we want to ask is, from your perspective, what are the most important psychological or psychology-related topics that people in this room should be considering over the next 5 years? And so you might incorporate kind of what you foresee as kind of really interesting, major upcoming advancements in technology, or maybe things that you see as gaps in our knowledge that you think we should be studying.
So I will somewhat repeat myself in that, very specifically, I think if you could come up with whatever positive or negative variable that you're measuring that we want or don't want in the world, a way for us to map the variables that we have in technology to that, then that would be immensely valuable and really directly applicable. And so I think of things like text analysis, right? There's a lot of work on text. Can I analyze text? And there's tons of text being generated constantly by these platforms. Can I use that text to understand, is the user happy? Are they are they living a meaningful life? Are they fulfilled? Are they sad? Are they going through an event? All those things are super important variables that I think a lot of us are working on, but they're really directly actionable. If you make this amazing validated variable method of doing that, then it's directly applicable to billions of people, in a week or in a month, right? So yeah, that's to me is the easy, low-hanging fruit and the most impactful thing we can all work on.
Yeah. So I don't know if this is helpful, but I know what I know about psychology, right? I think I was invited here because I've been doing some stuff with behavioral economics. I've been inspired by Richard Thaler and Cass Sunstein's stuff, and that led me to read some of the primary literature. Where I was kind of going with my talk is that I think that we can kind of blow up their insight. I mean, if I can paraphrase, Nick, you're from the University of Chicago, you tell me if this is a good paraphrase. They talk about libertarian paternalism. I think of it as being human-centered design or user-centered design for choice environments. And there's actually a quote that I had from Thaler in one of my slides saying that when he and Cass Sunstein sat down to write the book Nudge, they were inspired when they reread Don Norman's book, The Design of Everyday Things. And I'm like, oh, that's just incredible. That really got me thinking. So I feel like that insight, I think, needs to kind of be expanded and incorporated into technology, into AI. And I think of it as being two parts. One is the kind of stuff I was talking about, maybe Dan Goldstein was talking about yesterday, which is can we build technologies that help make us smarter? And I completely applaud what you're saying. Can we also build technology that improves our health and our happiness and our well-being? I have less to say about that, but I think it's incredibly important. So I'm a big fan of effective computing and Adam Ghazali's work and Rosalind Picard and stuff like that. An example of something that I don't like, and sorry to pick on FB, but I'm not a big social media guy myself, but when Nancy was talking just now about that idea of there are different strategies for handling this, you can not get on a lot, or you can be very open or whatever, or you can be very careful and just choose your settings and things like that. That's a kind of choice architecture that I think has to be thought through a little bit. My friends have even told me that. My friends, criticize me for not being on Facebook. And they say, well, you can choose your settings. I'm like, I'm just too busy. I have better things to do with my time than figure out these settings, and they might change anyway, and I'll probably make a mistake. So I just don't even go there. But to me, that's kind of the analogy of Richard Thaler saying, yeah, I mean, sure, you can fill out a form to sign up for the retirement, but people just aren't going to do it. If you just make the default that they're enrolled in the retirement plan, they're more likely to save for retirement. So can we just bake those kinds of smart design features into our technology a little bit more? And of course, the third leg of the stool here is ethics, right? We're talking about the data, we're talking about the kind of psychological, the human factors, but then that gets us into well, what is the right choice architecture? And that's where the kind of stuff Iyad was talking about yesterday is really important. How do we figure out what the right thing to do is in the first place? Anyway.
That's great. We have a follow-up question to that about interfacing with academics, right? So all of you have these backgrounds, these PhDs, and you interface with academics all the time. I'm curious about how should we go about collaborating with you? Are there ways to get access to the data? How are you thinking about interfacing with the scientific community?
So at Ranker, we have been contacted by people at UC Irvine who do work on crowdsourcing algorithms, and they just emailed us out of the blue and asked us for some data. And the nice thing about being a smaller company is I can just make a decision, right? It's not it's not a hard process. There's a lot less.
Just like Deloitte.
There's a lot less layers, right? So yeah, I mean, I think Of course, the Facebooks of the world have tons of data, but if there's a domain you're studying, there might be a smaller website where the decision-making process is a little easier. And that's, and so that was Michael Lee at UC Irvine, and he sent like a few grad students up to work with us, and we published a paper or two. And then, I still work with some of the people at USC, and that's more like I'm trying to get the grad students to come and work at Ranker. We're always recruiting, like we're hiring if anybody's interested. Yeah, I think that it's just emailing the person, especially if you're, and maybe just don't always just think about the Googles and the Facebooks of the world. Like there's interesting data all around that we're all collecting, especially if you're in a domain-specific area. If you're doing online shopping, there's a bunch of smaller sites that would be happy to work with you. And we're all just really busy and just want, if you can somehow solve a problem or help us, analyze some data, then, I built like this tiny interface for him to download data himself, so I didn't have to, micromanage the relationship. If you can make it like simple and get some work done, then we're happy to do that kind of thing.
Okay, well, I'll give a specific example that'll enable me to finish up my presentation. What I didn't get to is that we're starting to do work with applied behavioral economics, and so that might be of specific interest to some of you guys. Remember I said before, like the kind of classical use of our algorithms was to help experts make better decisions, a doctor making better diagnosis, a hiring manager making a better hiring decision, an underwriter making a better underwriting decision. Well, there are going to be a lot of applications of predictive models where that really won't be the whole answer, right? You're not going to get any value out of a model unless the algorithm output drives a better outcome. And now what if we're building a model for, say, child support enforcement, right? So I can build a model to say, hey, this is the non-custodial parent who's currently paid up on their child support payments, but it's at risk of falling into arrears. That's helpful because it enables the caseworker to reach out to that non-custodial parent first rather than somebody else. So that's a good solution, and it's been helpful, and we've done that before, okay? It only occurred to me after I built that model that, wait a minute, what if we had used something like mental accounting or pre-commitment? What if there's some smart behavioral intervention that caseworker could use with the non-custodial parent to help them stay paid up, right? Maybe some kind of form of, and again, I'm not enough of an expert here, so I can read the literature and I can kind of make stuff up, I can kind of try things, but we're more likely to sell a project like that if we have one of you guys behind us so we can add to our proposal and actually work with you, or one of your interns, or one of your students, or whatever, or if there's some academic who doesn't want to face publish or perish and come to work for us kind of thing. I'll give you an example of where this actually happened. The state of New Mexico hired us to build what you might call a fraud detection model. That's what I was initially calling it, but it really wasn't. This is for unemployment insurance. The idea is that if you're laid off from your job, you're supposed to log on every week and recertify that you're still looking, and also write down how much money you earned last week. This is a lot like inflating insurance claims. Like, you have to kind of be honest. And so right now there's this kind of very inefficient pay and chase model, where like if we realize that Juliana has been kind of lowballing her income for the last 5 weeks, if we realize this retrospectively, I try to come and like claw it back from Juliana, right? Much better if we could, yeah, I know, I wouldn't trust in the first place either. No, much better if we can build an algorithm using kind of web click data. So why is it that for the first 4 weeks that Juliana was logging on at Tuesday morning at 9 o'clock, not Saturday at 4 o'clock was this like weirdly suspicious number? Like, what's going on there? So if there are enough things like that, maybe that'll flag an indication that Juliana is like in decile 10. She's the most likely person to be kind of collecting benefits improperly. They hired us to do this. And that was the project. But again, here's the naive machine learning approach, the non-psychological approach. Like the naive approach, the naive idea is that, well, there are bad guys and there are good guys. So we use an algorithm to figure out who the bad guys are, right? The trouble with that is that, well, there are 2 problems. One is false positives, right? The base rate is low. So if you look at Bayes' theorem, even decile 10 is going to be mostly false positives. So if you just like cut off the benefits of all those people, you're going to get into trouble, and you're going to do the wrong thing, right? So there's an epistemic problem here. It's like, on the one hand, I know that Juliana is like 20 times more likely to be collecting benefits improperly than Nate, right? But on the other hand, she's like 75% chance she's still collecting them properly. So it's this paradox. How do you act on an indication like that? I call this the last mile problem of predictive algorithms. So what I suggested is let's use nudges. Let's use choice architecture. And I was inspired by some of the stuff I'd read in Dan Ariely. Like putting the coffee, or the eyes behind the coffee machine. You guys know all the stories like that. And to Kate's point, a lot of the things we tried didn't replicate on this online environment. And we're not sure if it's because of what Kate was talking about. But anybody want to guess what did work? Eyes. Not the eyes. No, I was thinking about something like that. It wasn't signing your name first at the top of the thing. It was none of that kind of stuff. It was, did you know that 99 out of 100 of your neighbors in Bernalillo County report their earnings accurately. Not honestly, but accurately. We talked about this very carefully, the user-centered design with our clients. They said it's not honest, it's accurate. People might not understand. We want to make it, like Thaler says, make it easy. We want to make it natural, right? So it's not like there are good guys and bad guys. It's more like people are more likely to be good or bad depending on the situation, right? Is that the right way to say it, right? So we're trying to create the situation that kind of like, encourages people's better angels to come out. And it cut improper payments in half, right? It was just a huge effect. We couldn't believe it. It was just astonishing. And this is A/B testing, right? On this online environment. We got the results back, and we set up an environment that enables the state workers to do their own A/B testing now. So this has been replicated and replicated and replicated. Subsequently, Mike Norton and his postdoc Oliver Hauser from Harvard Business School worked on us on another project in New Mexico. And this, by the way, led me to create the Nudgeapalooza, our first annual behavioral exchange last year that we held at Deloitte. We're doing it the second year in a row, a week from Monday at Georgetown. And our keynote speakers are going to be Mitesh Patel, the director of the Nudge Unit at Penn Medicine, and Wendy Wood from USC. So I'm hoping we'll have a Nudgeapalooza 18, and maybe some of you guys would be interested in joining us for that. So I created the Nudgeapalooza to kind of facilitate this kind of like academic, real world, data science, psychology kind of interface.
So first, thanks for taking the time to come here and talk to us. Second, this is a question motivated by one of James's slides, though. I would obviously really appreciate all of your perspectives. So you cited the Dawes, I think, 1968 paper, which found that just machines did poorly in predicting, just humans did poorly in predicting, but the best predictions came from situations in which humans picked the features, and then the machines were able to attach the beta coefficients. Now, yesterday, Professor Goldstein talked about these feature selection tools like Lasso, which would, in theory, kind of eliminate the effect of that interaction term between human and machine. And indeed, that's supported by what you talked about with Zach S. and chess. So I'm wondering what you guys see as the areas in which that interaction term between human and machine are greatest, both in industry and public policy.
All right, this won't be complete. There are two ideas that come to mind, and so I love the question. One is, again, in like the data science sub A, like the deep learning kind of view of the world, the features are kind of created by the deep learning algorithms, and that's all really impressive, and it's not what I do. Me personally. People in my firm do it, but I don't. This other kind of notion, which I don't think is going to go away anytime soon, I personally don't think it will go away until we have general AI, is what you're talking about with the DAWs, right? And yeah, Lasso, Lasso is a refinement of stepwise regression, right? Classification of regression trees, random forests, these are all things that can help us select variables. But there's also feature creation, right? A lot of times I won't even know what the right variable is until that can be the hard part, right? There's this notion of like 80% of data science is data scrubbing. Well, it's not really scrubbing. A lot of that is feature creation, and that can be very, very difficult. So that takes a lot of creativity. And really, a lot of the juice, the value comes from choosing the right, kind of creating the right features in the first place. And that could be like a flash of insight that happens every once in a while, or it can be just like a really good conversation with the domain expert. So that's one thing. So that's on the model creation side. On the case-by-case use side, I asked Dan Goldstein about this yesterday too. I'd love to like read up on this more, but the one example of where humans are necessary for the case-by-case decisions is the meal broken leg problem. Is that phrase familiar to all you guys, the broken leg kind of idea, right? If Jim has like a 95% chance of seeing a movie on Friday night at the ArcLight in Hollywood because he's a really methodical guy, and they have the new Coen Brothers movie, and it's Friday night, all these good things. But if the movie manager knows that Jim broke his leg on Wednesday, well, you just override the model because the model doesn't have that, right? So that's why that's why I feel like we need this kind of transparency. If the model's a black box, and it's just this kind of magical thing, then the movie, the theater manager or the underwriter or the doctor, they don't know how to override this. And so this has become more of a problem. The more we're using really complex AI, like kind of IBM Watson-style information retrieval algorithms. If we're using that to kind of help a doctor make a diagnosis, we better make sure the doctor understands why. What is the information being used? Why is the algorithm saying what it's saying? So we need to kind of give enough kind of hints to enable the doctor to kind of complement the indication with a decision to override or not, or to complement the algorithm with other bits of information. So again, I don't know to what extent this has been studied systematically, but it's something that I feel like we have to kind of muddle through in the real world. And then there's also the issue of fairness, which is a whole other conversation. Gloria?
So I love the idea of human-centered design, and I love this idea.
Excellent.
But when I interact with my colleagues who are in data science, whether it's academia or industry,
Yeah.
They might say yes in principle, they
Yeah.
agree with it, but
Right.
there is this tendency to dismiss the soft sciences.
I
right?
agree.
And so
I agree.
how do you go about changing the mindset of someone who's trained to think in terms of, everything must be quantitative? How
Right.
do you change a culture?
I don't know. I mean, for me, it's Shakespeare. I play the fool a lot. I use humor. But no, seriously, I've gotten this from colleagues. When I would give that Paul Meal, Robin Dawes, Moneyball thing, some colleagues will say, well, Jim, that movie's 10 years old. They don't get it, right? I mean, we can't use that slide anymore. Or another one is, and this came from a machine learning, former machine learning professor in Singapore that I worked with for a while. He said, I can't have my people work on that stuff. They'll just go bored and leave. Because to them, it's not interesting unless it's technically sophisticated. But again, complex models don't solve problems. They can solve problems sometimes, but I think more often, we're going to need kind of human-computer interaction systems solving problems. I find it much more interesting. But I feel like, yeah, it is. So I'm going to push it back to you. How's that? I think it's got to start in universities. There need to be more kind of interdisciplinary programs. So I feel like, these engineering schools, you're a psychologist in an engineering school, so you're really well positioned. And you're at UC Irvine, which is very distinguished from machine learning. Somehow we need to break down these barriers. But I'm trying to do it in my small way with the Nudgapalooza. I would love to write a book about this stuff if I could.
I just want to mention, a long time ago, when people were designing systems, the HCI field got the idea that we should have interdisciplinary teams working in design.
Yeah.
So let's put social scientists on these teams. And
Yeah.
I remember a long time ago, IBM was hiring social scientists,
No.
right? So
Yeah.
I think we need to be thinking about interdisciplinary teams that work in data science.
And here's another collaboration possibility. I mean, I'm kind of like pleasantly amazed by this, because usually I feel like I'm this kind of lone man, but this idea of human-centered design, some of my colleagues, some of my leaders in my firm are talking about the need for, they're calling it cognitive design thinking. I mean, I'm not personally crazy about that phrase, but fine. I think we're kind of like coming at this from, I backed into this through Richard Thaler. I don't know where they're coming from, but I'm like, great, fabulous. So to me, I want this to be a service offering at Deloitte. We're not just going to like build you the best deep learning model. We're going to kind of like set up the system that drives outcomes, because we're a consulting firm. We have domain knowledge, right? We can bake that into these algorithms. We can help. So if we can work with academics to make that vague idea a reality, that'd be another great. I would welcome that.
I think we should also not let people get away with the idea that technical, like physics, is a more complex science than social science.
Yeah.
Like, I just think you should immediately push back that, a rock is a rock is a rock. So if you do research on a rock, it does the same thing, and you don't have to worry about how the rock feels, right? And there's just so many things that you have to deal with in social science that makes it a much more complex thing. And so I think there's a real argument to be made that social science is actually more sophisticated, it's harder, and it should be thought of as, it's what you're doing in physics or plus.
Well, and what you said earlier too, that like there's this dogma that all the answers are in big data, and that's not true. Very often really important answers are going to be in ethnographic research, smaller data too, and we need to somehow get that message out there too.